Hi guys, I thought it would be kind of fun to do a video comparing my two pregnancies. I am like 34 and a half weeks right now as I'm filming this, so I figure with about 5 weeks left, it would be kind of a good time to sit down and film this video and just kind of go through random symptoms and just some random stuff that has been both the same and very different from my first pregnancy. I would say overall, this pregnancy has been very different from my first one. That being said, I want to go through the similarities first, and then we'll talk a little bit more about what's been different afterwards. So, similarity number one, I got hairline zits before I got my positive test. And that's something strange that has persisted throughout the pregnancy. I just get these zits like right along my hairline or like just in my hair randomly, and they're super hurty, like very, very sensitive zits, and they're just like really intense, and I get like several of them at a time. And that's something that was something in my first pregnancy that I looked back on and I was like, that was weird, maybe that was a sign. But then this time around, as soon as I saw them, I was like, oh my gosh, that's totally a sign. So I like definitely took it as a sign this time because I had the experience the first time, because it persisted throughout my pregnancy. And then once I was unpregnant, once I had the baby, they were like magically gone. And so as soon as I got one this time around when we were trying, I was like, oh my gosh, that's it. The next similarity is headaches in early pregnancy. I had headaches in early pregnancy both times around. They lasted a couple weeks longer this pregnancy than they did the first time, but for the majority of the second and third trimester, I don't get headaches. So headaches are pretty bad in the first trimester for both of these pregnancies, and then second and third, not too bad. I am on a pill called Procardia these days, and I've been having a couple more headaches, but my OB says that it's because of that pill that I'm on, so I'm not gonna blame it on anything else. But yeah, so headaches, like I have migraines and bad headaches when I'm not pregnant, and so pregnancy is actually a time in my life, at least so far, where I have had some relief from that. So that's actually been a really nice symptom of both of these pregnancies. The morning sickness really only lasted about a month both of these times. So when you're like in the midst of it, you're like, oh, this sucks, this is terrible. But like once you get to the end of the first trimester and you look back on it, it's like, oh, that wasn't too bad. Like I really didn't have morning sickness very bad. I did not ever throw up. I don't think I ever threw up this time or last time. Maybe once each time or something. I don't know. It just wasn't, it was not an everyday thing like I know a lot of women experience. I've been very fortunate to not have bad morning sickness. I just had that feeling where if I was hungry, I was like starving hungry, and I felt sick because I was starving, but the thought of eating made me feel sick too. It was like this terrible cycle. Like I needed to eat something, but it just wasn't always available, or it just wasn't always practical to like continue eating all the stinking time. So that's the only real struggle as far as morning sickness is concerned in both of my pregnancies. They have also both been pretty equal in the acne department. Actually, I don't remember what week it was, but there was one week where I started getting a few zits down around here that I had gone several weeks without getting any zits, and I was like, what the heck, why all of a sudden am I getting a bunch of zits? And I looked back at my old, I don't know if it was my vlogs or if it was my blog posts during that same like week when I was pregnant with my first son, and I was having the same zit problem like those same weeks this time around as I did last time around, and I thought that was really funky. Not too terrible acne wise, but I am typically, when I'm not pregnant, I'm a person who like hardly ever gets a zit, and so it feels like it's a lot when I am pregnant and I'm getting zits all the time. Like I've had a few on my chin the past couple weeks that just like will not go away. But yeah, so it feels like it's a lot because I usually don't ever get zits, but it's really not like anything crazy, honestly. Okie dokie, so that's it for everything that's the same. Now let's hop into all of the differences, which is a list at least twice as long as the first list. So the nausea or morning sickness with baby number 2 this time around was a lot more intense in the beginning. I still didn't, I didn't get super duper sick, and I don't feel like it lasted any longer than the first time around, but it just felt more intense this time around. I don't know. I had more of the heightened sense of smell when I was pregnant with my first son. This time around, I didn't so much notice it. it was definitely like when in my first pregnancy, it was definitely one of the first signs and one of the first symptoms that came up in my first trimester was being able to smell like everything. Like I could smell the garbage over there, and I could smell like this dude smoking like 10 cars down in traffic, you know, like the sense of smell in my first pregnancy was intense, and I don't feel like it was anywhere near that this time around. So my boobs were more sensitive the first time around, but my nipples were more sensitive this time around. I remember in the very beginning with my first son, my nipples were sensitive like maybe a couple weeks after I got my positive test. And it was only just a couple days, and it was like in the shower, like with the water coming straight on them, that really bothered me. This time around, it's like all of the second and third trimester, my nipples have been like super duper sensitive. Probably more so in the second trimester. I feel like they're kind of getting a little better these days, but that's just like so weird to me. Like I thought like all the changes were supposed to happen in the first trimester, but it seems like that was not the case this second time around, at least. And also I know that I mentioned in maybe just last week or a couple weeks ago, my boobs have actually started to be a little more sensitive this time around. Not like more sensitive than the first time, my first pregnancy, but just that I haven't experienced any boob sensitivity this whole pregnancy until the last couple weeks here. So nipples were worse this time, boobs were worse the first time. I do feel like I've had less food aversions this time around, but I think maybe I've had more cravings. And that's kind of hard to say. I've definitely had less aversions, I know that for sure. Like in my first pregnancy, like sometimes I would just think of a food and it would like make me feel sick and I like totally didn't want it. And I don't think I've ever really experienced that this time around. Sometimes this time around, like we schedule out all of our food, all of our meals and stuff. And if I'm like, oh, we're having spaghetti tonight, I'm gonna switch that with Friday's meal and have burgers instead because spaghetti just doesn't sound good. But it's not like I like want to get sick because I think of spaghetti. It's not like it totally grosses me out, but it's just that I don't really want it. This time around, I feel like I have had more cravings, and I feel like I'm more, I don't know, that's like really hard to say. I wrote down that I've had more cravings this time around, but I'm not totally sure that that's really true. I feel like maybe the cravings are about the same as my first pregnancy, but aversions are definitely way less than they were the first time. In my first pregnancy, I had some, I call it just melancholia. I just felt kind of down some days, just kind of off and dreary and I don't know, just kind of off for a few days. Like kind of more toward the beginning in my first pregnancy, and I don't think I've ever really had that this time around. I definitely had more lightheadedness in my first pregnancy. In the first trimester, the first few weeks, I would get just like a random wave of lightheadedness in my first pregnancy, and I've only had that a couple times this time around, and it's just can't even compare to what I had in my first pregnancy. Oh, I definitely had more cramping and round ligament pain the first time around. I don't think I've had like really any cramping this time, and round ligament pain is really only just a handful of times maybe, but I remember in my first pregnancy, like I always had round ligament pain. Like if you look back at my vlogs from my first pregnancy, like literally everyone is like 26 weeks, round ligament pain, 28 weeks, round ligament pain, like literally all I ever talked about, because it was like super duper frequent in my first pregnancy. But I'm so glad it hasn't been that bad this time around, because that sucks. Like if you just like stand up out of your chair to walk over there, like you have to like stand up so slow so that you're like muscles don't like stretch too much and cause that pain. And the cramping, I remember around 15-ish weeks in my first pregnancy, I had one night of super bad cramping, like really intense cramping, and that was sucky. I haven't had anything like that at all this time around. I will kind of admit that I think I've been meaner and more emotional this time around than I was in my first pregnancy, and I think that was more toward the second trimester. I was just more snotty and just had an attitude. And I don't think I've been that bad lately. I really don't. I think I've been very cheerful and happy lately, but I think kind of more toward the beginning I was a little more bitchy than I was in my first pregnancy. I definitely felt more hungry with my first son. I gained a lot of weight with my first son. I don't know if it was just because it was my first pregnancy and I was like, oh, we're eating for two, we gotta like take this really serious, I gotta have all these extra calories and blah 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 blah, or if it was the way he affected me, because he was a big boy, he needed a lot of food, so it made me want a lot of food. But I was definitely had more hunger. I was just more hungry when I was pregnant with my first son than this time around. I really haven't had, like in the first trimester, I like to snack because the morning sickness makes me feel gross. So I feel like if I have something in my belly, then I won't feel gross. And then kind of toward the second, third, like transition from the second to third trimester, I kind of started getting a little more hungry again, but really not as intense as it was when I was pregnant with my first son. The only time I like didn't feel hungry when I was pregnant with my first son was like the last few weeks, like maybe from, 34, 35 weeks on. I just was so tired of the hospital food, I think, and I just didn't want to eat the same stupid thing all the freaking time. And so I think that kind of attributed to me not being as starving to death. Now I have written down less breathlessness this time around. And overall, I think that's true because from the very beginning with my first son, I was out of breath. From like the moment I took my first test, I was out of breath all the time until I gave birth. And this time around, it's only appeared in the last few weeks since I've gotten gigantic now and we're gonna be having a baby any day now, So I did not experience that in the beginning or in the middle this time around, and I'm super glad for that because I remember it was so hard to like even just sit down and film my weekly videos my first pregnancy because I would have to take huge giant breaths and just like pause and breathe like all the stinking time just to get through a freaking 10-minute video, So I'm glad that that was just in the first pregnancy, that it hasn't happened this time. And lastly, I want to talk about movement. I was able to feel this baby so much earlier than I felt Calvin, my first son. And that is probably because of my placenta placement location. And with my first pregnancy, I had an anterior placenta, which means it's on the outside of your belly. So it's kind of cushioning between baby and you can't really feel super defined like body parts or anything. Like you can't really feel super well. And they say that it can kind of lead to you not being able to feel the baby start moving until later. Anyway, this time around, my placenta is at the very top of my uterus and it kind of prevents baby from stabbing me with his little feet up in my rib cage, which I am so thankful for because that was such a pain in the butt with my first. But it also leaves the full belly part exposed without the placenta there to buffer between us. So I can feel like anytime Aaron sticks his little foot out or his elbow or whatever he's doing in there, like I can feel the bump very distinguished. Like you can totally tell. And that's really cool. I'm glad that I've been able to experience it both ways, but it's just really cool to be able to actually like super duper feel, and not just feel from the outside, but when I could just like feel him from the inside too, like that was way earlier. So I have the weeks mentioned. Let me see. So it looks like the first time around with Calvin, I felt him on the inside around 15 or 16 weeks, and I felt him on the outside around 19 weeks. Then this time around with Aaron, I was feeling him around 12 weeks. And I know a lot of people claim that you can't feel him that early, blah, 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 blah. I know what I was feeling, and I could feel him around 12 weeks. And then by 17 weeks, I could feel him on the outside. So that's a couple of weeks. That's a whole 3 weeks before for the internal and 2 weeks before for the external. So that's pretty cool. But they also say that you're better at telling the movements for your subsequent pregnancies too, so I'm sure that kind of plays a role as well, but I cannot discount how much the placement of the placenta plays into that too. So that's it for my symptoms as far as baby is concerned and other random things are concerned. Aaron seems to be measuring about half a pound behind Calvin at the last few ultrasounds. So if I compare like Calvin's 32-week scan to Aaron's 32-week scan, Aaron's about half a pound lighter than Calvin was. So that gives me hope that he's not going to be a giant baby, even though he is measuring big. He's still big. He's still like a week or two ahead. He has been most of the time. So he's a big boy, but at least he's smaller than Big Brother was, at least as far as they can tell on the ultrasounds, So I know those aren't exactly the most accurate ever. They can go a pound or two either way. So hopefully it's kind of true. We have a lot of ultrasounds because I'm a high-risk pregnancy, and so I think that because we have like several of them and I can compare several of Calvin's to several of Aaron's, it gives a better reading on it than if I just had like one random one with Calvin and one random one with Aaron. So I think that kind of works out a little bit better. As far as the pregnancy itself, my membranes ruptured at 32 weeks with Calvin, and they haven't done so yet, so fingers crossed they hold out a couple more weeks. I do have high fluid levels. I had high fluid levels with Calvin as well. I passed both my gestational diabetes tests with Calvin and with Aaron, and I've really never gotten an explanation for why my fluid levels are so high, because everybody thinks big baby, lots of fluid equals diabetes. So that's just kind of frustrating to not really have an explanation for why that happens. If it's just a coincidence that it happened again, is it going to happen with any future pregnancies that we have, you know? So I don't know. That's just another similarity between the two that I don't know if we'll ever really get an answer on. When I was pregnant with my first son, my doctor said that it was a freak thing that my water broke early and started leaking. And so this time around it hasn't happened, but they've got me on a bunch of medication and they're keeping a really close eye on me, so I don't really know if it like was never gonna happen anyway or if it's just because of the medication they have me on, so who knows. I've gotten the steroid shots for the lungs for both of these boys. With Calvin, it's because my membranes ruptured at 32 weeks and they had to stop my labor. With Aaron, it's because I went into labor and delivery at 31 weeks and was having a lot of contractions, and they were worried about him coming early too. So both of my boys have tried to come early, but hopefully this little boy does not come early. Calvin, we got to wait out until 37 weeks. So hopefully Aaron will wait out at least until 37 weeks as well. So that could be another similarity for the boys. I think that's pretty much it though. If you guys have any questions, please leave them down below. Let me know how different your pregnancies have been. I love hearing from you guys down in the comments section. I love talking to you guys and just hearing about your lives, as well as any of your comments that you have about my little situation here. You guys are doing great. Please give the video a thumbs up if you did like it, and I'll talk to you next time.